Hey guys, what's up? And welcome back to a brand new video on the channel. Today we're going to be ranking every gun in Warzone from worst to best. Now, the looting system in Warzone is pretty unique compared to a lot of other BR games where there will be a set of base weapons that can be attained through standard looting that all have their own unique variants as well with different attachments and ways it performs and stuff like that. But there's also a system of loadouts where you basically pick your own class that you design yourself, and it gets a little messy, so it's not really part of the loot table. So to keep it simple, today we're just going to be ranking all of the actual lootable gun items in Warzone. This should help you get a better understanding of all of the unique properties and just overall effectiveness of the lootable weapons in this game. So that being said, if you guys enjoyed the video today, give it a thumbs up and also subscribe to the channel if you're brand new, because apparently 85% of you guys aren't subbed, so do it up. Also, let me know down below in the comments what your favorite gun in Warzone is, whether it's from just the regular loot pool or it's something out of your loadout. I'd love to know what your go-to setup is. Also, go follow me over on Twitch, links in the description below, but let's get into this. Coming in today at our worst spot, we have the crossbow. Now, again, because these do not include any loadout weapons, simply lootable items, the crossbow just really isn't it, to be honest. While the kill power on this crossbow is relatively high, I believe the biggest problem is that because Warzone operates primarily in three-man squads, the time between each shot is significant, even if you do manage to down somebody, so it's not very practical against big squad battles. Now, I think if solos were implemented into Warzone, the crossbow might actually be slightly more effective, as it is unbelievably powerful, but as it stands right now, I just think it is the worst weapon in the game, all things considered. Coming in just above that on our list, we have the M13 starting pistol. Now, of course, this has to be somewhat low tier because everybody's going to be spawning in with one, and I think the biggest hindrance to this weapon is its capped fire rate. You're only able to shoot this so fast how much the gun will let you. Your trigger finger, and to some degree, doesn't matter with this weapon, and also when you're shooting a fully armored player, good luck. You only have 13 in the magazine, and if you miss a single bullet, it's going to take you a while to kill anybody. It's definitely doable for the early game, and that's essentially why you spawn in with it, so it gets the job done where it's needed, but other than that, in comparison to the other guns in the game, the M16, no matter which way you spin it, is just not that good. Coming in just above the M16, we have the M19 Pistol. Now, the core differences between these two, the M19 actually has the identical damage profile to the M16, however, it does hold 4 more rounds per magazine, and also M19 does boast a higher rate of fire. While the difference is minimal, it is enough to make a difference in an early game gunfight when your enemy is using an M16 and you have this weapon. You will beat them out just because your DPS is going to be slightly higher due to the mathematics. Not an amazing weapon or anything, but certainly a cut above the M16. Coming up next, we have the RPG launcher. Now, this can be an early game tool that is fairly effective, but the fundamental problem with the RPG is that it's very inconsistent and ineffective anywhere past about 50 meters, because even if you're trying to shoot into a window from that distance, you're not guaranteed to even get in there, and the spread is pretty much unpredictable, and so it's just not a very reliable weapon. It's not technically bad because the damage output is pretty high if you can land your target, but it's just miserable at trying to track things down, and especially vehicles, you don't want to be put in that scenario. Next weapon coming in above that, we have the 357 Magnum, and while this weapon boasts some very rare variants in the game, I don't think this is super practical for most people. The damage profile on the 357 is very high, second only to the Deagle. I actually think it is a pretty decent weapon to use, especially getting some of the rarer variants, and it's certainly a weapon that rewards a steady hand, but in case you're missing a couple of shots or if you get into a close quarter situation, this really may not be the ideal weapon. The 357 is super situational, so I don't tend to run it very often, and I don't see a lot of other players using it either. It is by no means a terrible weapon, but certainly not one of my favorite. Next weapon coming in above that, we have the Pila rocket launcher. Now, this one is quite rare to find. You won't see it very often in the general loot table, but it's very good because it's the only lootable launcher that can realistically track vehicles. Now, it will be able to lock onto targets, which is important because the RPG doesn't have the capability to do such things, and this is great for taking out vehicles, ones that are either on the road or even ones like helicopters in the air. The only problem is that it's kind of a one and done thing. You shoot it once and you're basically through, so you have to go and find and switch to another weapon, but for its own purpose, it does it very good. So the Pila but is an absolutely class weapon in this game. Definitely recommend if you ever come across it. Next weapon coming in above that is the Model 680 shotgun, and I like this and I dislike it all at the same time. Now, this only has a common, an uncommon, and a blue rare version, and the ejector is obviously going to be the best variant of all of those. Now, the only thing is that the Model 680 is great for early game and shooting players with no armor, but sometimes it can feel like a hit marker machine when you're shooting at a range that isn't directly in front of your enemy. If you're a little bit farther out, this weapon is just absolutely miserable and just feels like a hit marker maker. This weapon can be significantly more effective if you change it yourself in your loadout class setup and obtain it that way, but the regular lootable ones are good only up to a certain extent. But anyways, coming in next on our list today, we have the Mark II Carbine. Now, this gun is particularly interesting because it's not the marksman rifle that boasts the most amount of base damage. However, it remains the most consistent over range, meaning you're not going to have that much damage drop off when using the Mark II Carbine, making it way more effective at very long range, even compared to something like the Kar 98. The only big problem is that certainly up close and at their most effective ranges, the Kar 98 and even the EBR are going to be better choices for marksman rifles, and the Mark II Carbine just can kind of feel like a hit marker machine when you're up close. Oddly enough, the Mark II Carbine shines best when it's used at very long ranges, but the lootable versions that you get in-game don't really have the highest magnifications of scopes where you're going to be engaging in those long-range fights, so it's not necessarily ideal. You can put them on a loadout class with a better magnification scope to make them more suitable for those said engagements, but other than that, it's just an okay rifle right now. Coming up just above that, we have the MG34, and this LMG is very common to find in Warzone, and the great thing about it is it has an incredible DPS. The rate of fire along with the damage per bullet is straight on par with the PKM. The only downside to running this weapon is the recoil is very unpredictable and strange. It has a lot of horizontal kick, and also it only holds 50 per magazine, whereas the PKM holds 100. Also, only uncommon and rare variants of this spawn in the loot pool as far as I can tell, so you really will get like decent builds of this, but nothing that is fully strapped out or crazy. You can again customize these a little bit better in your own loadout, but generally I don't recommend doing so, as you can find very solid builds of this gun in game. It's easily one of the most consistent early game weapons, and I highly recommend it. It's something that you should definitely go for when setting up. But anyways, moving on, coming in after that, we have the PP Bison. Now, while on paper this gun looks really good, it's not one that I personally tend to use a lot, but it is very effective in the right hands. Now, when you compare this to the AUG, they have exactly the same damage profiles, but the most significant difference separating these two weapons is the rate of fire. The AUG sits at about 750, while the PP Bison sits at 650. It is very slow in comparison. And again, while the PP Bison is not a bad gun by any means on paper, it just does pretty much get outplayed by the AUG in almost every way. The PP Bison does hold 64 rounds per mag, where the AUG only holds, I believe, 25, but for most people that doesn't seem to be the biggest difference in determining which weapon they run. Coming in above that, we have the P90, and as far as I can tell, in the Warzone loot pool only has one variant. It's a rare one called the Dry Heat. Now, the thing that I really like about the P90 is that it just feels consistent. Believe it or not, there's actually some SMGs in the game that just completely outdo it in terms of DPS and even recoil control for that matter, but the P90 is never a bad option to get, especially when early game looting. Of course, the P90 doesn't have the most crazy DPS for an SMG. It's actually on the lower end in terms of damage per bullet and even fire rate for that matter, but it's never a bad weapon to use. It just isn't like a melt machine like some other ones are. It's also worth noting that since it only comes in one variant, you know exactly what you're going to be running when you do get the P90. Coming in above that, we have the PKM, which I believe is one of the most criminally underrated guns in the game. Now, the PKM does have very high damage per bullet. It's very comparable to the MG32 in that way, but it comes in much better variants. It has an epic build called the Batty and a legendary version called the Fire Hose, and they both come with scopes that make it very easy to spray at a quite long distance and take down multiple targets. Because it holds 100 rounds in the magazine, you don't really need to reload even fighting an entire squad. it is absolutely overkill in solos. It doesn't quite have the same fire rate as the MG32 does, but what you trade off for fire rate, you get in recoil control and just consistency overall. Coming in just above that, we have the Scar. Now, the only reason I'm putting this slightly above the PKM, even though it has less rare variants, is because of its just capability. While it is one of the more vanilla guns in the game, it has so many practical uses in scenarios that you really can't sleep on the Scar. It usually doesn't see much play outside of the variants that already exist in-game, the most rare one being the Eagle's Talon, I believe. Most of the time when either you're using a Scar or somebody you're playing against is using one, they found it through loot because it's not one of the most popular weapons when it comes to obtaining them in loadouts for whatever reason. Also, the damage hardly drops off at all at range with the Scar, meaning it's a good weapon to use with scopes. And again, while the Scar may be one of the more basic rifles in the game, it hardly has any downsides whatsoever. Coming in above that, we have the M13 assault rifle. Now, this is sort of the counterpart to the Scar as being one of the more like vanilla rifles in the game because it has an uncommon and a rare variant, but they have a couple of statistics that separate it from one another. Now, the M13's damage per bullet is actually way lower at 36 versus 56 for the Scar, but the M13 does have a way higher rate of fire, meaning the DPS is actually going to be a little bit quicker than the Scar. Also got a slightly better reload time as well as a bigger magazine capacity, so I typically prefer the M13 to the Scar in terms of if you're comparing them to their exact variants, but generally I think they're pretty similar. Coming up next, we have one of my personal favorite weapons in the entire game, the MP7. Now, this seems to be the P90 just with slightly buffed statistics virtually across the board. Now, as we all know, guns on paper versus guns in practical gameplay can be very different, but the MP7 seems to reflect its statistics quite nicely, keeping a very good base performance. Now, while the P90 and the MP7 share the exact same damage per bullet, the MP7 does have a faster fire rate and is arguably easier to control. The MP7 does have a few different variants, but all capping out at blue rare. Some people I've seen do choose to run the MP7 in their loadout class, which is a good call because you can put whatever attachments you'd like on it while keeping that very consistent performance. It's a great gun all around, and I genuinely think is one of the SMGs that doesn't have any downsides at all. Coming up next on our list, we have the AK-47. Now, this is one of the more unique weapons in the game because, according to the loot pool, this doesn't have any like uncommon or even rare variants. All of the ones that you're going to get are going to be legendary or epic. And so, while the AK is probably one of the harder guns to control and does have very weird recoil, the good news is the variants that you're going to be getting are specifically catered to cut down said inconsistent recoil. The gun hits unbelievably hard, so if you're able to get the first shot off in a gunfight, you're most likely going to win because of that DPS you're putting out. The rate of fire isn't anything amazing, but it definitely gets the job done. The AK is a super solid weapon to use and can honestly be used as a loadout gun replacement if for whatever reason you lost your weapon or just can't get to it at the moment. The AK also greatly benefits from crouch spring, so in the hands of a skilled player, it is incredibly dangerous. Coming up next, we have the FR556, or better wise known as the FAMAS. Now, to be honest, I don't see this gun a lot in game, whether it's through the standard loot pool or even through loadout drops, and I think the reason for that is that it's just unbelievably rare. It does have legendary and epic variants of it as well, called the Fractured Forces and also the Patchwork, and it has the highest damage per bullet of any of the assault rifles. 64 at the standard range, but of course what we got to keep in mind is it is a burst fire weapon. Now, that can be a good or bad thing depending on your preference on those sorts of things. It can also be put into single fire, but generally is best used in burst mode. However, that will significantly impede it at range. It is a great weapon overall, though never a bad choice to run. Moving up next, we have one of the highest tier weapons on this list, the R90 shotgun. Now, this comes in two variants, a legendary and epic, the Hard Hat and the Death's Voice. And the cool thing about the R90 is it's very practical and can fit in many scenarios. Some shotguns are only good in one particular instance, and once you shoot it, the reload is killer. You're probably going to end up dying. Because the R90 is a double barrel and pump action shotgun technically, it has an extremely wide range of realistic uses, and I just think it's one of the most valuable guns you can pick up and easily the best lootable shotgun in the game, no doubt. Coming Coming up next on our list, we have the classic Kar 98. Now, the K9 is interesting for many reasons. It comes in two variants, the Dust Devil and the Heart of the Beast, both epic and legendary. And I really like this as a sniper rifle, but the only problem is sometimes it doesn't feel as powerful as it should be. It is bolt action, so you need to rebolt, of course, between each bullet. Landing shots with the Kar 98 in theory should be rewarding, which it is. It has a very standard high base damage at good range, but it has very significant drop off over very long range, which isn't good considering it's basically a sniper rifle. It's technically a marksman rifle in Warzone, but the K9 can end up feeling less powerful than it should be. Although I absolutely love it, I think it's an amazing weapon. It does have a couple of shortcomings. Coming up next, we have the MP5, and this again comes in two legendary and epic variants, which the MP5 is basically the best SMG in the game, and arguably has some of the best stats out of any weapon period in Warzone. A very good DPS because of its damage per bullet and also rate of fire. Alongside that, has also one of the most tame spray patterns ever. All of the recoil is mostly vertical, which is super easy to compensate for. Hardly any horizontal at all. And while I don't get to play the MP5 a ton, just because it's not super common in the standard loot pool, you will see it from time to time in people's loadouts. Like, it is a fairly common SMG in there. So expect to be seeing the MP5 more, and consider running it yourself if you've never picked it up. Coming in just above that, we have the Dragunov sniper rifle. Now, this is basically everything I like about the K9, minus all the stuff I don't like, and it's not even a bolt action. The Dragunov is probably one of the easiest to use sniper rifles in the game because you don't have to reload between each shot. You have a lot of wiggle room and mercy for missing a bullet, but the ones that you do land actually deal a ton of damage. And another great thing is that the scope is very open, so it makes it incredibly easy to see your peripherals while aiming down the sight still. It does come in two variants as well, which make it absolutely amazing. It is a severely underrated gun. It may not look the part, but it will impress you when it comes to its performance. There's no doubt about that. Up next, coming up to near the top of this list, we have the M4. We had to talk about it at some point, and this is probably the most common weapon you will see on the battlefield, whether it be in loadout drops or even just looting it straight up on its own. It has, again, legendary and epic variants in loot pool, which are both very solid. But let's talk about the M4 and why it's used so much. Despite it being nerfed a while back, it still remains pretty much the king of all ARs, certainly the automatic ones as well. The core reason why the M4 is used so much is because it's literally good at everything. It's great up close, it's pretty good even really far away, and it really shines at those medium range engagements. It's got a fairly easy to control spray pattern as well as a great DPS. Really, there's not much else to say about the M4 that the weapon doesn't already speak for itself. Most likely you've been using the gun in game, or you've seen the majority of players running the M4, and it's just all around amazing. Now, coming in above that, I almost want to give this as an honorary mention, the MG32 grenade launcher. This might be the rarest gun in the game, and I've only got it once out of all of my playtime. It's extremely rare to get, but it functions as a blow-up on contact grenade launcher in Call of Duty like you'd be used to, but it just is simply incredible. It's hard to put it in comparison to most guns in this game, so as far as like the loot pool is concerned, this has to be up there, but the MG32 kind of gets its own little special category here. But finally, guys, coming in at the number one spot, the best gun in Warzone, in my opinion, of the loot pool is the FAL. And the reason I believe this is the best gun in the game is the FAL takes the same like mantra as the M4, but just brings it to the extreme. You can challenge snipers using the FAL. You can even outgun people in close range, fast firing the FAL. It literally is one of those guns that isn't as simple just to use as the M4. It's a pretty much, it's a straightforward process. The FAL is a bit trickier to get a hold of, but it has two different variants that are absolutely wonderful. I think the M4 is always going to be the more practical weapon, but the FAL just has so much more potential when used in certain scenarios than the M4 that it just outshines it entirely, I think. So these were all of the guns in Warzone ranked from worst to best. Let me know in the comment section your favorite gun in Warzone, and let me know what you thought of the list. Now, again, these were just lootable pools in this. They weren't pulling from loadouts or anything. I will be making a video on what to run in loadouts instead very soon, so make sure to subscribe and stick around for that video. But I hope you guys enjoyed this one nonetheless. If you did, please make sure to give this video a like rating, subscribe if you are brand new, and also go follow me over on Twitch where I'm streaming almost every day. Links in the description down below. Thank you all so much, but have a fantastic rest of your day, guys. I gotta go. Take it easy, and peace out.